be sure to speak for them as well as yourself. Everything that happens in this room is fully shareable outside of it too. Be transparent. And having said that, each session is being recorded. So if you need to eat lunch or anything like that, just feel free to certainly turn your video off at any moment. That's certainly fine. And with that, we'll move into, so the second item is discussing OPDS staff feedback on recommendations. So as an agency, we sat down and kind of went through the recommendations and wanted to just sort of raise any feedback that we have on that, anticipating potentially the commission asking us, well, what does the agency think of these recommendations? And so I listed out the two items that we have. And the first one is regarding the definition of staff. You heard us, where there's a lot of discussion around whether we would consider, like an answering service was probably the primary example of whether that should be included as an FTE or not. And as staff, we would want to exclude an answering service, or really anyone that's not doing exclusive support for attorneys. So a temp agency, we would consider that would be fine. A temp agency sending over a person to work for someone for a period of time, even if it's just a day or two, and then you find another temp person, or even something as short term as that. But an actual answering service, photocopying service, like someone that's providing a service at a company where it's not exclusive to, the person isn't exclusive to your entity, we would not recommend that. So I want to open that up for discussion, and then we can move into the second recommendation. But I just wanted to get any thoughts you might have on that. Olcott?
If we're, and this is from the consortia end of it, which is different clearly than an office that contracts with OPDS, is if we have to have half-time and just, half a staff per FTE, an awful lot of the attorneys in a consortia are not even full-time. They're part-time, 3/4 or something like that, which means that ultimately you're probably sharing staff.
Right.
I know that I share my staff with somebody else. Well, that may not be exclusive to attorneys. I recognize what you're trying to do, and I don't object to, but it's how do we do that kind of thing? Because an awful lot of consortia people are not full-time and with, if you will, part-time staff that's not necessarily even half-time staff. You're going to be sharing staff, and it may not be, however you define staff, you may well not be sharing it with another attorney.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Olcott. Aaron, you want some, I see your hand up. Michelle, I'll get to you in just a minute, but I think Aaron maybe has some clarification.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify, if you hire staff half-time, the concern would just be that half of that person's time is working on your business. The idea is with that answering company, the person isn't devoting a certain number of hours on a contract, 3 hours to you on any kind of exclusive basis. So we're not concerned about lawyers who are sharing support staff within an office setting. If you're not a full-time, it's mostly about having an individual who's devoted just to that attorney's support, and it's not dispersed. And part of it, I think, goes to the complication from the agency's perspective of actually calculating how much this staff is actually, how to value this staff time. We're looking at it in terms of FTE, and which we can calculate with half-time staff or so forth, but not with something like an answering service, because the answering service isn't really giving you an FTE.
Thank you, Aaron. And then Aaron, you reminded me too of one further clarification I want to make. And then Michelle, we will definitely get to you. Another clarification too is that this isn't saying that we wouldn't fund it. We wouldn't fund it under an FTE, the staffing portion of the value, the rate value. Instead, it would fall underneath the overhead portion of that, right? So when we start moving into defining what overhead is and what's all included in that and valuing that, then we can certainly look at what is the value of the answering services that a number of attorneys may be using, especially those that are at significantly less than full-time, and so it's harder to hire a 0.2 staff or something like that. We're just wanting to shift it over into overhead as opposed to FTE staff, because it makes it very, one, the value isn't there compensation wise, and then it's a lot harder to manage the quality of that versus an actual person that's exclusively doing that work. Michelle, thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple thoughts, because I do use an answering service, so I can kind of speak to this. So places like Ruby or Smith AI, those are the two big ones I know of. You can find their monthly plans online. They have pretty easy to find packages that are outlined on their websites that say how much it costs per month. For example, Ruby's like $300 a month or so for 100 minutes. And so you also get reports every month, as at least through Ruby, of how many minutes are used. So that could be something that we could calculate. So just to speak to that aspect of it, there are, at least with Ruby, ways to track how much time is actually being spent by these remote answering services. The other thing I just want to note is more of a personal perspective, which was when I first started out here in Union County, I had a half share of my consortia contract. So I started off pretty small, and I wasn't making enough to hire a full-time employee. That would have just, I couldn't do it. And so I hired Ruby to do my answering service. And that's, like I said, $300 a month, as opposed to the amount I would have to pay an employee plus benefits and all of those things. And it allowed me to do the legal work that I needed to do to serve my clients without giving, half of what I was making from the contract to an employee that I simply couldn't afford. So I think I do hear what you're saying, which is that you're not saying you're not going to pay for it. You're just thinking about how to classify that. I think that's an important distinction that I appreciate you making, because I do think it's something that shouldn't be discouraged, especially for newer attorneys who might just be starting out like I was several years ago, where that's the best option. It's a great middle ground when you're just starting out and you need some help, but you don't have the capacity to hire someone full time. So I just think those are just the points that I wanted to make with regards to the answering services. And if anyone has any specific questions about how those work, I can probably speak to that, and I would be happy to do so. Thanks for letting me chat.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Brooke, I see your hand up.
All right. I'm working remotely today, so if you hear the screaming of small children in the background, it's normal. It's fine. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. The only thing I wanted to respond on this is part of the reason I made the motion early on in our meetings about OPDS paying for somewhere between 0.5 FTE and 1 FTE for staff is to have the flexibility depending on the organization. So like if Michelle's doing a contract that tells you, look, I have a part-time answering service, then it's probably a lot more reasonable that you're only going to expect her to pay for a half-time physical staffer because she has that. Whereas if you have a PD's office that has no virtual staffers, you may expect me to have 0.8 or 0.9 or 1.0. And I think it becomes more reasonable depending on what we're telling you about the organization and how it works. So that's my only point. I don't have a problem with the requirement of the person being a dedicated staffer for FTE purposes, as long as LPDS is willing to be flexible on 0.5 to 1 FTE, depending on per attorney ratio, depending on the type of organization and the other information we're providing you.
Gotcha. Thank you, Brooke. That's helpful. Mark, I see your hand up.
The only thing that just kind of caught my attention just a few minutes ago was the issue that how OPDS would define the requirement of staff to the individual attorneys, that if you want to be somewhat careful that, I mean, I know several attorneys that don't employ their staff, they contract their staff. And if you get into like language of exclusivity, you may be putting them in a jam tax-wise, saying that that person is actually an employee versus a contractor.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mark. Is there any other comments on this? Michelle, you still have your hand up, but I don't anticipate you do, but. And then Aaron, did you have any feedback on the, if the 0.5 was exclusive but anything beyond 0.5, between 0.5 and 1, sort of what Brooke was suggesting a little bit, may potentially include a answering service? I know that we don't have been making a distinction about, the staffing versus overhead if we do that.
My understanding was that the agency's position was that if we're paying for FTE, we want that to go to a person. I think we could work on the wording, Mark, to avoid independent contractor concerns. The intent for the agency was not to preclude people from hiring independent contractors as their staff function. And so if we need to nuance the language to be responsive that way. But my understanding was when we're talking about staff, we're thinking of individuals who are working on, for the attorney during the allotted FTE time, because the agency is talking about paying, staff rates for that person, for a person to be there. And so it makes more sense to me that if we're talking about something like a service, that would go to an overhead cost. It makes your staff more effective and more efficient. But we're talking about, I'm being redundant now, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Aaron. Jack, you haven't spoken yet, and then Cott, we'll get back to you.
So I don't really have a dog in this particular fight, so I'll keep this real short. It just occurs to me another way of looking at it is having an answering service seems more akin to having voicemail set up than actually having an employee. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Jack. Cott.
My only question is, I certainly support the concept. It's how do we word it? And certainly, what's the feedback makes sense. It just is, how do we word it so it accomplishes what we all think it should accomplish? And maybe it's better to just say, this is what we mean as an example. I don't know. And sounds like this came from you, Aaron. So maybe you got some ideas, or maybe that's later.
I think what we're hearing is that we proposed some language, and it's not necessary. There's some concerns about the language that we proposed to accomplish. We talked about the idea of just expressly excluding answering services, and that's easy to do in the staff definition. The one concern, and actually I don't have the definitions in front of me, I'm sorry. Billy.
Yeah, let's see. Would you be able to share the screen, David? We can pull up the recommendation real quick, that document. It's on T Drive. And then it's
Can we?
Yeah, we can.
Sure.
Yes, we can. Workgroup recommendations is the document under analyst
2021.
Yep. Go, and then workgroup. And then it's towards the bottom, it says work group. It's at the very top, sorry. I have mine sorted different. Because I have it open. And then if you go to the bottom of that document, we kind of have a working definition. You're gonna.
Is there going to be something coming up on the screen?
Yep, yeah, bear with us. We're almost there.
So okay.
So there's the actual definition at the very top, but then at the At the bottom, we were working through some stuff. We wanted to have a discussion. This is
Yep.
kind of a draft at the very bottom there. Aaron, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so in the kind of revised language that we were thinking about, staff or persons who provide exclusive support to attorneys and clients through administrative, clerical, communicative, technical, or similar work. I mean, the idea of exclusivity was to exclude something like a service where your time isn't specifically devoted to a certain lawyer or individual you're working or maybe pre-allocated to that work, and examples of staff that would not be exclusive. So we're trying to kind of define that word of exclusivity. Are answering services, and that those were a non-exclusive list. But I'm hearing, Mark, that you're concerned about that exclusive, the language being an issue for independent contractors, and we can look at that.
I'm not an expert.
And maybe simpler.
Expert in that situation, but I would say that that's as far as I understand, that was the definition.
Right, staff just doesn't include
employee.
answering service, photocopiing services. I'm sorry, I'm missing that.
Go ahead, Mark. If you want to start again, I think there was a connection issue there, talking to one another. Go ahead, Mark.
That, as far as I understand, is the definition of what a definition of an employee is, that they provide exclusive work for that individual employer. So I probably would, it's not really necessarily affect me personally, but I do know people that contract, and so we might want to look at the thesaurus on the exclusive, maybe individual support. Well, I don't know.
I've got a great thesaurus here in my office, and I'm even, and maybe again, maybe one way around this that's just simpler is we were trying to kind of get the nub of what, and it's a little bit hard to put your finger on the nub of what distinguishes the sort of the staff from an answering service. And that was the source of the word exclusive. But maybe the simpler thing to do is just take out the word exclusive and exclude answering services and other similar, photocopying services, information technical other types of services.
So just as a matter of clarification, the original definition of staff, Olcott made the motion and Bruce Tarbach seconded it. So that's just a point of clarification.
Yeah. And actually there too, you have staff are persons, not companies, who provide support for attorneys and clients through administrative, clerical, communicative. I mean, maybe we just need to clarify that definition by excluding answering services and similar services.
Any thoughts on that?
This is Kai. A thought is just add as a, if you will, second sentence, staff does not include services such as answering services, photocopy services, IT services. Keep the definition and then sort of add what it doesn't include. And
No. Oh, I think you needed to enable it. But that's what it was.
Close. Bear with us a minute. We're gonna put the read only. That's what it is. So here, let me shut mine. Let me close mine. Okay, now you should be able to.
Cool.
There we go. All right.
And we said.
Staff does not include services such as. And then paste.
Any discussion on that?
Todd here. I was just wondering if we should add in the words other contractable services such as.
I mean, that's useful in the sense that you're then allowing something like a, well, I don't know if the agency has a policy on this, Billy, but I know some PD's offices have internal IT departments.
Yeah, this wouldn't preclude an employee from being an IT person, an HR person. You could employ somebody to answer the phone. You could employ somebody to photocopy. All of those things could be a person on staff. This would just be out if it was outside of the agency or but we would allow, I mean, subcontracting too is something that we talked about. It's that's maybe where the word contractable, all those services, yeah, it's not exclusive because, you know, we definitely have examples where one person is working for two individual firms or sole proprietor lawyers doing similar work. So, and it's subcontracted at, 0.5 for each of them.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest, this is Scott, that we drop out the word other. Staff does not include contractable services.
And plus, when we give examples, I think we also then make it more clear too that that would not include someone that is actually working in the building, working in the office, doing the work. I'm at a little bit of a loss because I can only see the document on our end. So if there's further discussion, unless we get a lot of people talking over each other, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I had a point. I don't really quite understand the distinction of why contractable IT is not similar to, say, having a 0.5 FTE person. And I guess I bring this up because I understand why a non-physical reception, like an answering service, is not staff, and I agree with that. And I understand why photocopying isn't. Like, we use CDSS to copy files for us. That's clearly not staff. But like, we have an IT firm we've used for 5 years, and they do about 20 hours a week for us, and their work is just better than what we were able to do on site. That to me feels much more like staff. And it's okay if OPDS tells me that's not the case, we'll figure it out and make it overhead. But it seems to me that we're really precluding some options that might be harder. If it's hard for me to find IT staff without staffing, I can't even imagine how hard it would be for Eastern Oregon to do so without having an IT contracted person. So it seems like information technology doesn't quite fall under the same basket as answering service and photocopy services, but I acknowledge I have some self-interest here. So if people think otherwise, I'll adapt.
Thank you, Brooke. I think a point of clarity for me with the example I was thinking of when we put IT services in here was if you were going to Microsoft and needing to contract with them to upgrade your server or update all of your word process, your office stuff for, some number of discrete hours, and then they're done and they leave, and then you don't, I wasn't thinking of the situation you're describing.
Right, because we have a physical contractor who comes into our office and upgrades our computers and helps us with our iPads and every month meets with us to talk about the next IT thing we need to do. But I totally agree that like we shouldn't be able to be reimbursed for Amazon cloud services for the cost of our server or the Microsoft platform or anything like that. So I'm not sure if it's worth distinguishing this or if this is just a Eugene issue.
This is Cod. I don't think it's just necessarily a Eugene issue. And I have another suggestion, or actually a couple. Change contractable to contracted services, because who cares whether it's whether you actually contracted them. And I just say such as answering services or photocopy services, and drop off the informational technical services, because I think most of us, except for somebody in one of the two big offices in Portland, aren't going to have an on-site employee doing informational technical services. And I agree with Brooke that what he's describing really should be part of, quote, staff. And I also agree that somebody who's just calling up Microsoft, that doesn't count.
I'll just add that at MDI, we do not have a full-time employee for IT. We just contract out the services. And I know for sure that our IT person works for a number of other firms as well. So for what it's worth.
Aaron, thank you, Autumn. Aaron, do you have any feedback on that at all?
I don't. I have a question about whether it's overhead or not. I don't really know how to answer that question. On the other hand, what we're providing is, 0.5. The policy is 0.5 to 1 per attorney. So, PD's offices who are larger and can allocate that staff ratio differently within their organizations, it makes sense that then it kind of creates the capacity for those part-time IT services. So that seems fair. They're fine distinctions. So I think it's helpful to draft in collaboration here.
Yeah. And again, if anybody needs to speak up, please do. I'm not able to actually see people raising their hand right now.
This is Mark Lane again. I'm just, again, kind of wondering about, Billy, you talked about it as well, but the statement contracted services such as answering services, if I were to contract with an individual person to answer my phone, isn't that the same as contracted services? And so, I think we might want to be able to distinguish, and maybe I'm making a mountain out of our molehill though, but it seems to me that if you're saying, I think the question is it going to require an actual attorney to employ someone versus contract? And I'm not quite sure how you get yourself out of that pickle, but
Yeah, I think I would, thank you, Mark. Yeah, we wrestled with this too, right? Because we kind of know what we're talking about when we say an answering service. So we even went so far as to say, well, what if it's a temp agency that you're contracting with someone very temporarily, but that's still just one person that's going to be working exclusively for the amount of time that you've contracted for them. If it's a 0.5 even, as opposed to also, just providing a service that they're also providing to, 30 or 40 other entities at the same time.
And there's something different too about you're bringing someone in by by hours. You're buying their hours, and they're doing what you need to get done during those hours, rather than an answering service where you get billed for the number of calls that come in. Or the number of pages that get printed, right? It seems more project-based than, which is where we came to, which is why we landed on the language of exclusive, but I realize that's problematic.
We have Bruce, John Hamilton, John Sarr, Chris Kino, Rebecca, and Todd that we haven't heard from. So I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to speak before we go any further.
This is Todd. Just how I think the adjustments we made, I think fit what we've talked about concerning like larger offices and some of the things they're looking at. And I think this does clean it up a tad bit from where it was earlier today. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
This is John, and I agree.
Thank you, John.
This is Rebecca, and I agree too. Trust me, if I don't, you'll hear from me. So we're good on the cleanup language.
Thank you, Rebecca.
This is Bruce. I have no issues with the language.
All right.
This is Brooke. I have no issues with the language.
So the way we would have to approach this probably is Olcott made the original motion. Olcott has modified the motion. Bruce, you seconded it. So if we were sort of moving along those same lines, we would want you to, if there is a motion, and calling for an amended motion and then Bruce seconding it, then I think we can move forward with the vote at this point. Unless there's further discussion, for sure.
I would, Mrs. Cott, move that we adopt the revised definition of staff.
And
I second that.
All right, I'm going to move through the roll as far as calling for a vote. And this is just alphabetical. Autumn?
Aye.
Brooke?
Aye.
Bruce?
Aye.
Jack?
Yep.
John Hamilton?
Aye.
Jonathan Sarr?
Aye.
Chris Kino?
Yes.
Mark?
I just have one question. I can't see it on here anymore. Was the exclusive?
The word exclusive was removed.
Okay, aye.
Okay, thank you. Michelle?
Aye.
Olcott?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Aye.
And Todd?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Motion passes. And then the second recommendation was, and I'm just going to read through it. You have it in your notes, but just in the event you haven't had an opportunity to look at it. So we had a recommendation regarding administration, and we view that as premature at this time and not evidence-based, and that we should it should continue to be included in the list of topics for the next phase of work groups, so that we have ample time for gathering relevant research, discussing the research as it applies to Oregon and the various iterations of entities that we contract with, and then developing recommendations that deliver a sustainable, progressive, and efficient public defense, solidifying Oregon as a standard by which all other public defense agencies are measured. That's our recommendation. It doesn't necessarily mean that has to be approved. It's just that's something that that will be part of our presentation to the commission, as they will want to know our opinion on these recommendations as staff. Brooke?
Yeah, I'm unsure. I read the notes and the summary, but I'm unsure what you're talking about administration. Are you talking about the last sentence of our investigation motion that talks about contract administrator to encourage use of investigators? Or are you talking about an administration motion? Because I don't see it here in the notes. I know we talked about it, but I'm a little confused.
Yeah, bear with me. I'm finding here real quick. It's number 4 on the list of recommendations, and I'll read it. For entities who hold contracts with PDSC, OPDS shall provide additional funds for administration of the contract commensurate with the FTE contemplated by the contract.
Right, so this is to address the issue that I and other people brought up, which is that when you have individual law firms like MBI and Plain County and all those, they don't actually pay for like an executive director who is there not really taking cases and, you know, in a limited management role. That's my memory of our discussion around this. Just to frame it, I think it's important to add.
I agree, and I also think it's, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'll wait.
No, that's okay, Brooke. Go ahead. If we could pull that off, David, just so we can see the who's raising their hand.
Cott and Michelle had their hands raised. I'll go after that.
Thank you so much. I didn't see who was first. Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, this was my motion, and one of the reasons I brought it up was because we had that hard line OPDS had with the last round of contracts, where if a consortia wasn't 5 FTE, they weren't getting administrative costs, even if they were, for example, 4.95 FTE, they wouldn't get it, just hard line. And I guess one of the things that confuses me about this recommendation is what evidence would PDSC want? I think it's kind of evident to all of us that administration of any contract is going to have costs. For every report that OPDS wants, there's a time cost, there's an expense of staff that has to work on that. So I guess I'm a little confused as to what not evidence-based is referring to here. And again, like Autumn, I would say, I think this is an important motion, and I want it to stay put. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I'm just for a point of clarification, when we say evidence-based, when we started looking at this and even just trying to determine how we would calculate a cost for it, what would that look like for a sole proprietor that's employed at 0.6 with us? How much administration do you give that person, right? So, you know, and then do you give administration if there's 3 attorneys at 1.2 FTE? You know, there's all these sort of iterations of at what point do you, because at some point you just don't need administration as a cost in a particular contract because it's covered in the overhead of the rate. And so those were some of the discussions that we had internally. Whereas we totally understand that there needs to be some administrative costs when you have actual 1 FTE administrator that's employed. And then there's also the supervision piece too, which is separate from this and is a recommendation. I want to be very clear that we're not talking about that. This is the administration piece of which is separate from supervision. So just some additional commentary on that. Olcott.
This was adopted at the one meeting I missed. I think that every single person in this group who has anything to do with administering a contract knows that there are costs. I understand the details issue, but I don't think that we should remove this. I think, yes, maybe there are probably some details, but it's telling OPDS that, or PDSC, that administration needs to be funded. And that has been told to them for over 20 years. And it has been consistently, up until very recently, basically ignored. And I think that it needs to come, that is what needs to happen. Certainly parameters on it and all the rest of that, and that's not part of the recommendation. Those probably need to be discussed, but I wasn't here for that motion, but I think it needs to stay in.
Thank you, Pat. Brooke?
I very much agree with both my colleagues on this one. From my perspective, in the last contract cycle, administrative costs were given to holdout firms that otherwise weren't going to sign a contract, but there wasn't any rhyme or reason from my perspective. I'm sure there was from OPDS's perspective, but from my perspective, there didn't seem to be rhyme or reason why the consortium and Eugene got it and I didn't, because we both had administrative costs. And I realize there may not be funding to do as much administrative costs as OPDS thinks may be needed to make this function, but I think it's an important thing to have there for the commission to adopt and work out the details later as to what these costs are, because it has been historically been underfunded. So I very much agree.
Thank you, Brooke. Todd, you have your hand up?
I do. It's just one of the things that it says, you know, that it's not evidence-based. When I had read this initially, I just thought that when we take a look at every major corporation in America, they have administration. So why would it not be included in ours, and why is it not evidence-based? So that was one of those things I didn't really understand.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Any additional comment? Michelle, you still have your hand up, but just to make sure. All right. Anyone else? Brooke, you have yours back up?
I'll be very brief. The only other thing about evidence-based, Todd's point is exactly right. I think it would be difficult to find a state that has our interesting amalgam of consortia and public defenders and private law firms. And because of that, it may be difficult to find a model where a state funds administrative costs given our interesting mix of services. But so I don't see exactly how we could find an example that's representative there. And maybe there is one, but it seems like, yeah, you know, administration is needed for firms and businesses do them. Seems like evidence.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. Todd, I still see your hand up, but is that still valid or?
No, that was Todd's mistake. Sorry.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this or? All right.
Do we need a motion? I'm sorry, just Mark. Do we need a motion on whether we're going to keep this in or not, or?
Well, it stays in. I mean, it's already been put on. It's going to stay there for sure. We just wanted to make sure that if there was anything that we were going to be asked for feedback on, that you had an opportunity, that we had an opportunity to walk through it and talk through it before it went in front of the commission. So, like the previous definition, we could sort of come to an agreement on that. And this one, there may not be agreement. So that's okay too. That's what the commission is for, to say, you know, they need to hear from you what's important to you. That's part of this process. So I don't want to minimize that at all. We're not voting on the work group recommendations. That's what you're doing, and so that's what makes this so effective, in my opinion. So
yeah, I'm in favor. I think that should be required for OPS to bring in the administrative costs. So what that amount is, I guess, can be up for debate, but I think it needs to be in there.
Okay. Yeah, and so we'll try to develop some. I mean, we can use that then to develop a budget cost to that, what that looks like. So this is a good transition into then our next topic, and we might be almost done. So we have to determine what the budget impact is for each of these items that will have a budget impact, and that's going to take some time. So we had a discussion with our data person, and we are working with that whole data team to develop these budget impacts. It's going to take a little bit of time. So what I asked for was, what is a sort of a drop dead date that we can give to the work group that we will have some budget impact information, because that is going to, you know, the commission will certainly want to know that going into our presentation. And so by September 15th, and that is and let me double check that that's a Wednesday. I'm almost certain it is. So
it is.
Yeah, so we will have that information. I guess by the 10th, we would send that out, right? Because that's kind of our MO, is the Friday before a meeting, we send something out. I'm told that will be available to us by the 10th. And so talked in great detail about very specifically how to calculate all of this and what they're going to need to look at. And so we'll have that information for that meeting. So if we could set a meeting for September 15th, that would be our next meeting. We could talk about the budget. You'll have that information for that meeting. And then probably the two, we'll use that information to build our presentation, but also we were wanting to look at potentially one entity or person that's representing a particular entity to take each of the recommendations to kind of break it up a little bit instead of one person just droning on about everything, I think was how Cott put it. And plus, I think they get to hear a broader swath of voices too, and I think that can be really effective. So those are some things to be thinking about. We can spend some time today talking about that if people are prepared to talk about who might present a specific recommendation. Certainly we can spend some time doing that today, or we can do that on the 15th if people haven't had time to think about that yet. Any thoughts on that?
At the risk of seeming unprepared, was the whole document that you guys had up on the screen actually given to us via an email? I was just looking for it. I couldn't find it, but.
Let me, give me just a second. I want to,
I also joined late, so.
Yeah, let me
I didn't see it either, Autumn. It wasn't in the meeting attachment for our link for today, but I'm sure it was sent out recently.
It's a compilation of each of the recommendations, and I put it into one document for the purposes of sending it to our budget team to develop costs. But I can certainly send that out, and then you'll have an idea what each of the costs are. Elena, did we send that out? Or did we just kind of send out each recommendation as they were approved?
They went out as they were approved, Billy.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so I just did this for the purpose of organizing it internally to develop budget recommendations all in total for our team. But I can certainly send that out. I mean, that's easy enough to do after the meeting. So do you want to hold off for that reason, Autumn?
Oh, I don't necessarily think that I want to hold off, but it would be good to see it all in one place so I could wrap my head around, who all said what and, what I maybe feel strongly about and, happy to help. But I just wanted to kind of like refresh before I made those recommendations.
Billy, could you screen share it again so we could just go through it for a few minutes now? Or
yeah, for sure. And understand that the definition of staff has been modified, but we probably haven't made that change yet. So if we just start with the definition of staff, is there anyone in particular that would want to present on that?
This is Cott. I'm willing to do staff or the staff ratio or even contract administration. I think that supervision and investigators are appropriate, far more appropriate for a public defender offices, because for consortia, it's much more nebulous and they're sort of recommendations for consortia or study it for consortia. And maybe Michelle's the best one for contract administration.
Thank you, Cott.
I agree with both those things as far as Cott doing staff and Michelle doing contract administration.
I'm just kind of starting to jot names down beside each of these recommendations, and I can certainly include that in the document too, in case somebody decides they don't want to or they want to do something later. What about, so we have Cott for the definition of staff, Michelle for number 4, the administration. So we have staff to attorney ratio, and then we have supervision, and then we have investigation are sort of the other 3 topics.
Is Michelle willing to do administration? I know they recommended.
Right, so we'll just.
I can do it, yeah. I appreciate the recommendation, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about supervision and or combine with Brooke and both cover that because we are the two organizational people that handle PD nonprofits.
I would suggest one of you do supervision and one of you do investigators.
I'm happy to do either of those two, whichever, if the group's comfortable with that, whichever one Autumn wants to do, I'll do the other.
Can we scroll down to what the investigation one actually says?
I think it's scroll up, isn't it? Or it's right there, okay.
Oh, that's right there. Yeah, it's on the screen now. Yeah, I don't care either way. I don't feel strongly.
Brooke, you had probably more commentary about investigators than Autumn did, and that's just an observation. I think you both equally talked about the supervision piece of it.
I think you could safely say I had more commentary than I needed to on everything, Billy. But sure, I could do investigation.
Okay.
I'm not trying to drive anything. I'm just observing. That's all. So.
No, I'm dragging, and it's fully merited.
It's good that we can look back at our own minutes to figure out what we said.
Yes, isn't that nice? I agree. I agree.
So, to recap.
So yeah, so we still have a staff to attorney ratio. So we have PD offices talking, and we have two consortium, a little bit larger consortiums talking. So if there's anyone that's situated a little differently, maybe the staff to attorney ratio would be a good place for a little different entity to speak there. And again, we don't have to decide today. You can think about it.
Well, could we combine the definition of staff with the staff to attorney ratio as all part of the staff, which I think Alcott has already signed up for?
Any thoughts on that? Did you hear that?
I heard that. It's fine with me. And it makes some sense.
Very good. So I will put these names. I will modify this document with the updated definition of staff. I'll put the names down with each of the recommendations. I'll leave in the data and budget request ask that went to the budget team, the data team. And then on September 15th, we'll start at 11:45, same time, and you'll have budget information. That'll be another opportunity then to step in and say, oh, I would like to do one piece of this, and or I've decided I don't want to do this part of the presentation too. So that's another opportunity at that point. Right now, what we're looking at is there is the commission meeting is still being scheduled for the end of September, and it's going to be very short in that we're just going to do an update of sort of where we're at in this process. So we'll have met on the 15th. The commission meeting will be shortly after that on a yet to be announced date. And then we'll have a more substantive meeting in October, a sort of a full commission meeting. The one in September, again, will be really short. In October, there'll be a regular meeting that we will actually be talking about quite a bit of contracting stuff. And so I think it would make good sense then for this to be a part of that meeting. So that would be the presentation. And of course, I don't have the date up in front of me.
We can give it at the September 15th.
Are you talking about the meeting?
Yeah, the PDSC meeting.
The PDSC meeting is on October 21st.
Thank you, Aaron. So that would be the date that we would present these recommendations. So just to have that on your calendar and be aware of that. I don't anticipate we'll need to meet again after the 15th unless people want to, if there was anything further that we needed to do. But I think at that point, we really are just going through our presentation and thinking about how the budget might impact some of that. Although I want to be really clear that we are that we want policy to drive budget. That is the intent of what we're doing here. So Aaron, you had.
So So did we distinguish between previewing with the PDSC and then the time that the PDSC is voting and clarify which meeting this group is presenting?
Yes,
And
thank you. So the, we will just do a staff update on sort of where the status of the work group. There won't be any recommendations. We will just talk about where we're at in the process. And it's really just to kind of tee up for them a little bit that there's something coming from the work group of substance at the following meeting. So that's really the primary purpose of just giving them a status update of where we're at with the work group. The actual presentation of the recommendations will be at the October 21st meeting, and then that would be an actionable item on that agenda. They could kick it to the following agenda if they need more time to think about some things, but our hope is that they will have enough information to at least act on some or all of it.
For calendaring, what time are those meetings usually at?
Aaron, do you still have that up?
The regular,
Autumn.
Autumn, the regular PDSC meetings run from 10 to 2.
Okay.
Thank you, Elena.
You're welcome.
And Billy, this
Yes.
is Todd. I take it there is no PDSC meeting tomorrow.
No.
That is correct. There should be, it is up to date on our website, on the OPDS PDSC schedule. And we're trying to get a notice out to all of the PD community today regarding that. There was a delay. There's just been a delay. So yes, it's been postponed at this time.
It's fair to say there was a delay. That's okay. Billy warned us about it a month or 2 weeks ago, and I was just double checking.
Yeah. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Elena. Well, if there's no, that was the end of our agenda, and sort of what we need to think about going forward for the next meeting is just thinking about your part of the presentation, and we'll see you on the 15th. Thank you. Great job. Good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.